Whether it's a running back breaking through the secondary or a wide receiver on a foot race for the end zone, most defensive players in the NFL have a single goal in mind: to get downfield as far and as fast as possible.
We're thinking, wow, I've got to get from A to B within a certain time frame, and I can't let this guy throw me off track. So it's kind of like a chess match at that point in time. It's the battle to see who's the toughest.
Defenders, on the other hand, have a different goal: to stand in the way of the offensive player and stop his forward progress.
When you're coming in and making that tackle, you've got to come in and you've got to stop him right there on the dime.
Who wins this epic battle between the ball carrier and the defender? Newton's first law of motion helps supply some answers.
Newton's first law says that if an object is at rest, it requires an unbalanced force to make it not be at rest. Or similarly, if an object is in motion, it tends to stay in motion in a straight line at a constant velocity unless an unbalanced force acts on it.
In football, we see unbalanced forces whenever one player exerts a force on another and causes him to change his direction and or speed.
So imagine that a quarterback has just taken the snap from the center, and a lineman gets free from the opposing team that's coming from the other side, and when they collide, you can see an unbalanced force acting on the quarterback, driving him across the field in the direction of the charging lineman. That's about as unbalanced as it gets.
In physics, a player's natural resistance to that unbalanced force is something called inertia.
On the football field, you can think about inertia as being a running back who's already in motion, doesn't want to change the fact that it's already in motion. So it's going to take some external unbalanced force, i.e. a defensive player, to stop that running back.
Consider former New Orleans Saints running back Deuce McAllister, who at 6'1", 231 pounds, used his inertia when running to make him hard to tackle.
The size of the player is important to the concept of inertia because higher mass means more inertia.
But a player's mass is different from his weight. Mass is a measure of how much matter an object has, while weight is a measure of how strongly an object's mass is attracted by gravity.
So for example, a body on Earth would have the same mass as that body on the moon, but it would weigh less on the moon because gravity is less on the moon than it is on Earth.
NFL players with more mass have more inertia and are harder to move off their path. This concept even works on a quarterback sneak, when a quarterback uses the combined mass of his entire offensive line to gain a yard or two.
If you've got an offensive line that can overpower the defensive line, that's just what you do. You get on their hip and you just fall, and you just ride that wave forward.
In the NFL, whenever players go head-to-head, it's Newton's first law of motion that helps determine who will win the battle of the gridiron. To be an NFL kicker takes more than just nerves of steel and a strong leg. It also requires help from one of the key laws of physics.
It's easy to say, well, I just kicked the ball. Well, let's delve into it. Let's look at the specifics. What actually happens when you kick the ball, and why does the ball go where you ask it to go? And it is Newton's second law of motion.
The second law is one of three laws described in 1687 by Sir Isaac Newton, who used them to describe how and why objects move.
So the second law says if you have an object with a mass that is accelerating, and acceleration means a change in velocity, that is equal to the amount of force applied to the object. The way we say it with words is F is equal ma.
This also means that in order for an object like a football to accelerate, a force must be applied. To illustrate Newton's second law in kicking, we asked Morten Andersen, the NFL's all-time scoring leader, to perform his craft in front of a high-speed Phantom camera. The entire procedure unfolds in less than a second and a half, from snap to hold to kick.
It's all about training. and rehearsing and doing something over and over and over again.
To reduce the chance of a block, NFL kickers take just 3 steps to the ball. The final step is with the plant foot, which provides the stable platform for the kick.
I call it the moment of truth, and the moment of truth is basically when your plant foot hits the ground next to the ball. You're either in the right position or the wrong position.
The kick itself involves the entire leg building the force necessary to launch the football.
It's a hammer, and you're swinging the hammer, and you're trusting it, and it's going to be, it's going to be impacting the ball with great velocity.
An NFL kicker's foot is in contact with the ball for just 8/1000ths of a second, and in that time, his foot applies up to a ton of force to the ball. This quick, violent strike is a perfect example of what's known in physics as an impulse.
Impulse is an important concept because there is a finite time over which the foot is in contact with the ball, and during that time there's a force applied to the football.
An impulse is equal to the force multiplied by the time the force is applied, represented by delta T. If force is graphed versus time, it's possible to see how a larger force or a longer time for the force supplies a bigger impulse.
Since impulse is really just the change in momentum, and since the ball doesn't change its mass, you're really just talking about the change in the speed. The bigger the impulse, the bigger the change in speed, which means the faster the ball is moving after it leaves the kicker's foot.
Ironically, Anderson says the distance of a field goal doesn't change his approach to the kick itself.
Mentally, you want to look at a 50-plus yarder, like a 40-some yarder, with some room to spare. I think that's a good way to kind of fool yourself into thinking it's a shorter kick.
Whether the kick is short or long, Newton's second law explains what an NFL kicker must do to send a football through the uprights. Whether it's a lineman stuffing a running back or a safety colliding with a wide receiver, all NFL defenders have a single-minded goal: to stop the ball carrier.
The object of making a tackle is you want to get the guy down and limit the amount of yards he's able to gain, especially after contact.
When a tackle is performed correctly, it's not just a thing of defensive beauty. It's also an elegant depiction of Newton's third law of motion, sometimes called the action-reaction law.
Newton's third law says that each action or force has an equal and opposite reaction. So if I were to push against the body, that body is going to push back against me with an equal and opposite force.
An important part of Newton's third law is the concept of momentum, which in football is the mass of a player multiplied by his velocity, represented by the formula P equals mv. NFL players may not know the formula, but they're keenly aware of the role momentum plays in tackling.
It's very important to have some speed and momentum as you're going in to make that tackle. The better you're able to use that to your advantage, the better you're able to make contact and get a guy down right away.
In every collision on the football field, Newton's third law dictates that the total momentum between players must be the same before the collision as it is after the collision. This relationship is referred to as conservation of momentum.
The law of conservation momentum says that the P, the momentum before the collision, is equal to P, the momentum after the collision.
This law, represented by the formula P before equals P after, can be illustrated with a simple toy called a Newton's cradle.
In this case, we have displaced an initial sphere, and when we let it go, it has some momentum. It's mass times velocity. When it impacts the next sphere, that momentum is transferred through the middle 3 spheres and then passed on to the final sphere. And so because it has the same mass, it will move away with the same velocity that the first sphere impacted the middle 3 spheres.
The interaction of balls on a Newton's cradle can help illustrate what's known as an elastic collision, defined as one in which there is no loss of kinetic energy in the form of heat, sound waves, or deformation of the object. On the football field, collisions are typically inelastic collisions. because kinetic energy is released, mostly in the form of compression between the players' bodies and sound waves.
Inelastic collisions are the rule of the day. We see them all the time in football. That is, the energy of motion of two runners. After they collide, that energy is dissipated in deforming their bodies. That's like a spring. So some of your energy of motion went into that compression. You might have heard a loud snap from our pad. Some of the energy of our collision was transferred to the energy in the air that you hear.
While big hits look and sound spectacular, what's most important in tackling is stopping the ball carrier's forward progress.
If your pads are underneath his and you're hitting on an upward slope, you direct the energy up and you take him back. At the point of contact, hopefully that's where the ball stops play in.
Whether a tackle is successful or not, we can be certain that the same force is exerted on both players, and the total momentum before and after the collision is the same. For that, we have Newton's third law to thank.